Okay, good morning again. I hope everyone had a chance to have a coffee and a conversation over the past 30 minutes. It's truly my pleasure to welcome our next speaker for a really important session of this conference, and that is Dr. Lawrence Haddad. Dr. Haddad has been the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, or GAIN, since 2016. He was the founding co-chair and the lead author of the Global Nutrition Report, which was established in 2013 as a mechanism for tracking the commitments made by stakeholders spanning government, aid donors, civil society, the UN, and businesses. And today it is the world's leading report on the state of global nutrition. He was previously the director of the Institute of Development Studies and the director of Food Consumption and Nutrition Division at the International Food Policy Research Institute. And most recently, Dr. Haddad was the 2018 World Food Prize laureate alongside David Nabarro for his extraordinarily intellectual and policy leadership in bringing maternal and child nutrition to the forefront of the global food security agenda and thereby significantly reducing childhood stunting. He's here today to talk about global progress on Sustainable Development Goal 2, Zero Hunger. Dr. Haddad, thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the Global Food Banking Network for inviting me. I don't know much about food banking, and so I'm very happy to be here to learn and listen and to meet with some of you. My title sounds really boring. I'm going to try and make it not very boring. Can I have that monitor working so I can see the slides, please? My title sounds really boring. I'll try not to make it very boring. I'll try to speak for 15 minutes and leave space for 15 minutes of Q&A. And please ask me hard questions. Since I can't read that one, I'm going to have to peek at the board. Progress against global nutrition goals, and then a little bit of my 2 cents on how the role of business is so important. And I figure that you see business as part of the problem and part of the solution. And you're in a minority in the food and nutrition world. Most people in the food and nutrition world, at least coming from the public sector, see business, they only see problems, they don't see opportunities. And I wanted to share with you my organization's view on the role of business. So here's the problem we're dealing with globally. And you can construct one of these pictures for your own geography, your own country, your own region, or your own city or sub-region. The smaller blue circle is the chronic hunger number. That's the 821 million that we hear about from the UN. These are people who don't get enough food to eat. They go to bed hungry most nights. The bigger blue circle is the 2 billion people they may get enough food, many of them, but they don't get enough of the right kind of food. They don't eat fruits and vegetables, they don't eat animal-sourced foods, they don't eat nuts, beans, pulses, fish. They just eat the same gruel, which is really a gruel, every day, every meal, pretty much the same. Enough to fill their bellies, but not really enough to help them develop as human beings and individuals. The orange circle is the number of people that are overweight or obese globally. And that number is skyrocketing in every country. I was in Ethiopia a couple of months ago talking to the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Health people. They didn't want to talk about childhood stunting, which is kids that are too short for their age or too thin for their age. They wanted to talk about type 2 diabetes and overweight. So everywhere. And then the smaller circles are particular manifestations of malnutrition that affect under 5s, the under 5 kids. And the under 5 kids are super important, obviously, that their nutrition requirements are very big, they're growing very rapidly, their brain doubles in size, in weight. It doubles in weight in the first year of life. 1 pound, a brain weighs 1 pound at birth. It doubles to 2 pounds at age 1. and most of us in this room have brains that weigh 3 pounds. So you can see how quickly kids are developing. And those 3 small circles are stunting, wasting, and overweight. And those are 3 manifestations. And those numbers are way too big as well. Now, what's really changed in the last 10 years is that many countries are facing all of those things at the same time. So it used to be that Europe and North America faced a certain set of problems, and Africa and Asia and Latin America faced a different set of problems. This rather complicated diagram, I think the thing I want you to look at on this diagram is the orange colors. In the orange colors, the countries in orange have childhood stunting, which is not enough food so that the kid grows properly. They have anemia in adult women, so not enough iron in the blood, and that has all sorts of negative consequences. And they have very serious levels of overweight and obesity. So they are facing this triple burden, and that's the new face of malnutrition. And when you look at that picture, there's no country that doesn't have a problem of malnutrition. So malnutrition is, no country has a monopoly on the problem, and no country has a monopoly on the solution either. This is a scorecard from the Global Nutrition Report saying how well are countries doing in terms of each row is a different indicator. So the detail's not important here. There's 9 or 10 different indicators that we track globally. The key thing is the red is the number of countries that are off track. The orange is the number of countries that are making progress but not enough to meet the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. And the green is the number of countries that are on track. They're making enough progress to achieve those goals in 2030. Obviously, and the grey is when we don't have enough data to figure out where the country is. So we want less grey, and we want much less red. And we want that picture to be green, or at worst, orange. We want to get rid of the red, and we want to get rid of the grey. So we're not doing brilliantly. Some of the indicators not too bad, but some of the others are pretty awful. At the center of all of these different types of malnutrition is poor diets. It's what people eat. Not enough people are eating enough food, not enough people are eating the right kinds of food, and too many people are eating too much of the wrong food. So food is at the center of all of that. Now these, again, I'm giving you some rather complicated charts, but I was told that many of you are data geeks, so I don't feel too bad about it. You like data. So here's some number. Those of you who are in the know about health will know that there's something called the global burden of disease. This is a set of statistics that puts together all the mortality, either at a global or a national level, and all the morbidity together, and so scrunches it up and mashes it up into one statistic called DALYs, Disability Adjusted Life Years. So there's a group in Seattle called the IHME that works with the World Health Organization to say, okay, each country has this level of mortality and morbidity added up. What are the risk factors that are driving all of that? And they say, what are the top 10 risk factors? So here are the top 10 risk factors for Mozambique. I was in Mozambique in February, just before the cyclone hit. And on the right-hand side are the other risk factors for I think it's 2015 or 2017, the risk factors. The ones I've circled in red are the ones that are related to diet. So 4 of the top 10 risk factors for the burden of disease in Mozambique are related to diet. But just to emphasize my point, again, my organization is headquartered in Switzerland, even though I live in the UK. And in Switzerland, the same set of statistics, 5 of the top 10 risk factors for the burden of disease for Switzerland are diet related. So diet is central to everything that we care about. Now, in most things in development, and I'm a development economist, most things in development, as incomes grow and things get, economic development progresses, in general, many things get better. More kids go to school, infant mortality rate declines, we do get more gender equity, we do get better health systems, but diet doesn't necessarily improve as income increases. And here's some examples from the 9 countries that GAIN has country offices in. And the blue and the green bars are for foods that we generally consider to be positive things in people's diets. Fish, and I can't read the green. What's the green? Is it pulses? Maybe it says pluses. It should say pulses. Vegetables and pulses. But they are pluses, I guess. Vegetables and pulses and fish. And the red is sugar-sweetened beverages, sodas. And you can see in the blues and the greens are not going up very strongly. These are percentage increases over a 20-year period, 1990 to 2010. The blues and the greens are not going up very much. And in fact, for the African countries on the right-hand side, they're actually going down. And look at the red. The red is skyrocketing up. As people's incomes increase, urbanization happens, and people are consuming a lot more sugar-sweetened beverages, they're okay in small doses, but in large doses, they are not a good part of the diet. So what's going on? Well, a lot of things going on, but one of the key things that we worry about is that nutritious food that is rich in animal proteins, or just proteins, and doesn't have to be animal, but rich in proteins, vitamins, and minerals, those kinds of foods are getting more expensive all over the world. Here's a study from The Lancet, which is one of the leading medical journals, and it says for, I think, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Zimbabwe, they did a study. They said if those households in those countries, an average household in those countries, were to buy 5 fruits and vegetables a day for every person in those households, and that's one of the standard requirements, right? 5 fruits and vegetables a day. I think it's gone up to 8 or 9 now, but 5 is one of the standards. How much of their income would that take? Well, it turns out it would take 52% of their income to buy 5 fruits and vegetables a day for every person in that household. Clearly not feasible. Here's some data from Ethiopia. Over a 9-year period, 2007-2016, the real prices of foods, this is adjusted for inflation, the prices of the staple foods, the cereals, is going down, and that's a good thing because that means people have more income for other things, but the prices of the things that are nutritious foods are going up, and that's really disastrous for health and nutrition. So there's solutions, and there are, again, millions of solutions. I've focused on the 4 that I think are really important. I think there's a massive opportunity to engage better with business. We need to build a demand for nutritious foods because a lot of people, I talk to a lot of businesses and they say, well, if only people would demand more nutritious food, we would provide it. That's a little bit disingenuous of the businesses because they shape demand very profoundly. But I think there is a truth to it because most public sector efforts to build a demand for nutritious food are very worthy but very boring and very unengaging. My adolescents at home would just roll their eyes when they hear some of the messages. You should eat this because it's healthy. Well, that's really not a very good message for a young person. They don't really care that much. You should eat it because it'll make you look cool with your peers. It'll make you a better sports person. It's the thing to eat. That's going to resonate better with younger people. We need to improve access to nutritious foods. By that I mean prices. We need to lower those prices. And then we need to create an environment where businesses feel like they're not just being hit over the head with sticks. Sticks are important. So things like sugar taxes are important. But they also need incentives, fiscal incentives to provide more nutritious foods. If the government and the national health system says we need more nutritious food to be supplied at an affordable price, we should be willing to incentivize private actors to do that. So again, we always say businesses are part of the problem, but they're also a big part of the solution. I probably don't need to tell you this. This is what a food system looks like at a conceptual level. And for many audiences, I have to remind them that businesses are everywhere in the food system. In fact, businesses are the biggest investors in the food system. Therefore, we need to engage with them. If you don't engage with them, you won't change their mind. There's an African saying, if you want to change somebody's head, they have to be in the room. You can't do it if they're not in the room. Another way I convince people who are skeptical about the need to engage business is I say, where do you think people get their food from? Now, there's a romantic notion that most people in the world grow their own food. This, of course, is nonsense. Here's some data from the 9 countries that we work in at GAIN. And, okay, and some of these data are quite old. The Mozambique data is about 10 years old. But let's take the Mozambique one on the far left. In the urban areas, 70-something, I can't read well enough, but 70-something% of those households buy their food, right? That's where most of their food comes from the market. In the rural areas, it's a lot lower, 28%. Data are old. But look at some of the countries on the right-hand side. India, Bangladesh, Nigeria. Most of those countries, and these are the very populous countries in the world, and these are World Bank data, by the way. Most of these households buy their food. If you buy your food from a market, you are engaging with the private sector, because the private sector are the main investors in markets. So governments need to shift the demand for nutritious food. We need to do a lot better. And I think engaging with creative agencies and from the private sector, think about, I was talking to someone from the World Bank, and they recently about this, they said, my dream at the World Bank is that someone from Coca-Cola, who are brilliant at creating a demand and aspiration for their products, works with somebody from the government to create a demand for healthy and nutritious food. Now, I don't think it should be Coca-Cola because they're too embedded in the food system, but it should be the creative agencies, the madmen of generating this kind of, the madmen, of generating this kind of desire for food. So I go to a lot of food and nutrition conferences. I hear about the availability, the affordability, the acceptability of food. I never hear about the desirability of food. Never hear the word desire. Never hear the word delicious. Never hear the word taste. Left brain, this is obviously a highly scientific picture I'm showing you here. Left brain, very logical, linear, data-driven, evidence-driven, and that's really important because that says these are the goals. These are the goals we want to achieve. But how do we achieve those goals? We achieve them by bringing in private sector expertise around creating emotion around what we're trying to do. Linking health or nutritious food to the millions of other things that people really care about to get them to want to consume nutritious foods. And we're trying some of this again. This is not from us. This is an example from the UK. The Food Foundation is one of our partners. It's a non-profit. And this is, those of you from the UK will know ITV is one of the big channels, TV channels here. There's a big Eat Them to Defeat Them campaign going on right now about vegetables. They asked kids, what do you like about vegetables? And kids said, we don't like anything. We hate vegetables. Therefore, the idea is, well, if you hate vegetables, eat them to defeat them. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's kind of interesting. This is a rather risque series of ads we were testing in Kenya. This is some work from Kenya. I think we decided not to use these in the end. They were just too risque. But again, if there's one thing I want you to remember from this meeting, it's that slide. But it's the idea of generating emotion and humor and fun from a serious message. I don't think we're going to use these ones, but I thought I would share them. I thought they were fun to share you with. We also have to create access. So we have to create foods that are affordable. And there are two broad approaches to business, and I'll finish soon. I'm talking to myself. Support businesses that are already in the nutritious food business. There are a lot of them. They're already producing this. Let's get them to be bigger and better. And then businesses who are really producing foods that are not super healthy, what can we do to pressurize them? So for businesses that are producing nutritious foods, we need to support them. This is a picture I took when I was in Mozambique, the previous trip, from the last one I was in 2017. I try to go to each one of our countries every year and visit them. And this is a picture I took from a managing director's office on his wall. And I said, what's that picture? And he said, that's my mission statement. This is a managing director from a vegetable and fruit company. Medium-sized, they employ about 20 people on the outskirts of Maputo. I said, what's that? He said, that's my mission statement. I want to get the price of my product from here down to here. Won't that affect your profits? I said naively. He said, no, because as our market share grows, we'll be able to purchase inputs at a lower price. We'll be able to maintain the margin, but I'll be able to multiply the margin over a much bigger number of consumers. So that's what, it's good for my business. And I said, and it's good for nutrition because you're making all this healthy food available at a lower price. So we can support these companies. This is what one of the things GAIN does. We will give these companies technical assistance to help develop their business plan. We'll link them to finance, to formal finance. We may even give them small grants that we've raised from the public sector to buy key pieces of equipment. What about the businesses who are maybe mostly a part of the problem? Well, here, there's lots of pressure points we can put on these businesses, and GAIN does this. It works with companies. Most companies are not bad guys. Most companies are locked into a business model that they developed in the 70s, and maybe even before that, the 1970s, and even before that, when the issues of obesity and overweight and diabetes type 2 weren't such big deals. So they're kind of locked into a legacy business model, and they want to get out of it. Many of them want to get out of that and evolve it into something that's more in line with the increased demand for health. So we can have incentives from government, and I talked about taxes, but I can also think of tax breaks for companies that are producing more nutritious food. You can have demand from consumers. We have big campaign against plastic, non-reusable plastic in the UK and elsewhere in Europe. Why not from consumers? Civil society can put pressure on companies in this social media age. Companies that are doing dumb things, civil society will quickly tell the world about it. Many employees, and especially the younger employees, are searching for purpose. They want to work for companies that have a social purpose. And so, interestingly, studies from the US show that it's the employees that are putting the most pressure on the employers to do good in a social setting. We can put ESG as environmental, social, and governance pressure. We can put some shareholders, big shareholders, activist shareholders that may own 3, 4, 5%, enough to put them above the fray. They will put pressure on the CEOs and the C-suites of the companies to do more around environmental, social, and governance things, including health. And then finally, the companies themselves are not monoliths. There are many champions within companies that want their companies to be much bigger advocates of nutrition and health and anti-hunger. And we need to find those people and support them and help them within their companies make the case. So just recapping the solutions in a very high-level way, we need to engage better with business, and that's one of the things that attracted me to come and talk to you, because I think you have a very mature perspective on engaging with businesses. We need to build a demand for nutritious food. We need to be able to meet that demand at a low price and support companies that do that and incentivize the ones that don't. And we have to create an environment that makes it easy for companies to do the right thing and harder for them to do the wrong thing. We need to get from this situation. If we don't do something about this situation, we could easily be in this situation by 2030, 1 in 2 people. And we need to get it to at least 1 in 6 by 2030. And I really believe we can do that. But we can't do it just with governments and just with civil society. Thank you. So it says here I've got 14 minutes left. Is that really true? Wow, great. So I've got my pen and my paper, so I'm happy to take questions. Clarification, you're talking a lot of nonsense. I'm happy with any of those kind of questions or comments. Yeah, please, go ahead. Sorry, you have to wave your hand. Yeah.
Listening to what you said, I was thinking what all this means to food banking. Because supplying nutritious food to the vulnerable people will cost more. And you also talked about the SDG 2, hunger. Hunger is basically poverty issue. And food bank can solve some of the hunger problem within the community or within the country. But we don't have movements of food from rich country to the poor countries. So that's the limitations of the food bank in this goal of the SDG 2. So I'd like to hear your comments as to the what you said means to the food bank.
I mean, that's a great question. Thank you for it. I mean, I think again, I said I'm certainly not an expert on the business models and the modalities that you operate. But I would think three things jump to mind to me. One is I think you should interrogate that assumption that healthier foods is more expensive. I think if you go to Whole Foods in the US, yes, it's more expensive. But if you try to source, there's all sorts of, I think there's all sorts of fruits and vegetables and beans and other foods that are more affordable. Now, they may not be as desirable. I think desirability is the big challenge, not affordability. But I think the World Food Programme, which we work with, does these cost of a healthy diet exercises. I don't think they've done many in Europe and North America, but they've done them in many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And they find that the cost is a problem for some communities, for some age groups. Adolescents is a big problem because adolescents require lots of nutrient-dense foods, and those tend to be a bit more expensive. But they find that cost is not always the big issue. So I think first thing is interrogate that assumption that healthier food is more expensive. I think hard about, is it just calories or where do the calories come from? I don't know enough about what types of food you accept and what types of food you don't accept. I'd love to hear from you about that. I imagine you don't just accept anything. I think food banks, especially when you network, either nationally or internationally, because you really understand, you have insight into what people that are hurting and what people who can't get enough food to eat or enough of the right type of food, you have an insight into their reality. You can speak very powerfully to people in power, whether in government or the private sector or in civil society. You can speak very powerfully, so you can be very powerful advocates to businesses, to governments, and that's the kind of thing I was talking about. So I think I don't just see you as people who deliver food to people who need it. I see you as, when you do that, you create a powerful understanding and a powerful legitimacy and a powerful constituency to go and talk to people in power and say, these people are suffering. Why aren't you doing more about it? Why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C? And I think you can do that very powerfully. And I think the other thing you can do as a network is, I don't know of too many global networks of organizations that are trying to do similar things in similar ways. I realize there are a lot of variations on a theme. You have each of you has a different kind of model, a different kind of constituency, but that global networking power, I think, means that you can share solutions, you can share experiences. I think it's very powerful, and I don't know of many other networks that are like that. So I think, that's just top of my head. I think there are lots of things that are relevant here for you. I think the food banks can be powerful advocates especially to change the way businesses work, even though businesses are part of are presumably funders and supporters of what you do. To me, that gives you influence over them. I think people may think that gives them influence over you, but I think it works the other way as well. I also think you can convince many people in my world that the private sector is not, has to be engaged. So I think you have a lot of influence over this. Whether you have any incentive to do any of these things I'm telling you about, I don't know. You have to tell me.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. It's been a really enlightening, I can't only believe it's been a day and a half here. But one of my biggest observations, I'm from Canada, is that there is a real divide within the food banking community. And the divide is, like my colleague from Korea, which is some of us are focused on the systemic issues around poverty, whole scale, and all of the things that entails. And then there's another portion of the food banking community that's really focused on food waste. And I would say we're seeing an increased pressure by various actors across the food system to focus on food waste as a tool to feed, because it's about surplus food, versus on accessing needed food for population-specific needs. And there is depending on the country, you're going to get a different lens around people's ability to kind of intercept that. And I love it's going to sound idealistic. I love the notional idea of us applying pressure to the food system in a really substantive way. But again, another realization is that there is a lack of concrete data across our system that is standardized, that I think would arm us as a system to much better advocate for nutritional food, for access to, for example, all the surplus agricultural food, which would in fact increase nutritional value and content that we provide. So I'm just interested in your insight, because I appreciated the idealism of advocating, but I also see some of the huge gaps in the system for us to be able to advocate better.
This is going to sound defensive, but I don't think it is idealistic to think you can change things. My organization is a very small organization, it's 200 people. I think it's quite small. We've gotten all sorts of laws changed for the better for nutrition. All sorts of tariffs exempted for things that are really good for fortified food. You have to work in alliances, you have to work with partners, but I think it's the fact that you're on the ground doing stuff that makes you more powerful as an advocate than a think tank in Washington, D.C. A think tank in Washington, D.C. is powerful in a certain way, but if you have boots on the ground doing stuff, you're interacting on a daily basis with people and understanding their lives, I think it gives you a very powerful voice with powerful people. And I think the question is how to articulate that voice in a way that is not just seen as special pleading, that is really data-driven. So I think that is the challenge. And is there something like an annual Global Food Bank report?
We did release one yesterday.
You did? Okay. Sorry if I missed that. Does it come out? Is that the first one, or does it come out every year?
First one.
It's the first one. And does it have data in it?
It does.
A lot of data. And does it have the right data in it?
I guess we're going to find out.
I think that's a great first step, and I think build that out, and I think that's the data you need for your evidence. I think you can. I'm a bit puzzled as to why you have to choose one or the other of those options you picked.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that
Yeah.
it's one or the other.
Yeah, okay.
I'm suggesting that there is very different lenses on how to approach solving the problem. But I would suggest that. Thank you. I was saying that I don't think it's about choosing between food waste and accessing nutritional food. I'm saying that philosophies are very different country by country, and that as a system, like meaning all 157 people, 53 countries, our voice is in fact much stronger from an influencing lens if we have an ability to coalesce around some common, whether philosophical ideas or agreements around nutrition, food quality, standardization of packages, hampers, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can coalesce around the problem, what's driving the problem, and then you can coalesce around a number of different solutions, which the solutions will be different in every place. GAIN works a lot on food loss, so that's different from food waste. This is food loss within the food system through storage and distribution. And we do a lot of things to fix that, to reduce that from 50% of food loss to about 25%. And that's useful, but the most useful thing about doing that is it gets us into the food system in those 9 countries. And we can then say to the governments and the businesses, this is where you're losing most of the food. This is a big part of where the food system is breaking down. So you can do both, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Question here. Oh,
So I'm not doing a very good job of moderating.
¿Le puedo hablar en español?
Okay. Hold on. Give me a sec.
Le quiero contar que en el Banco de Alimentos de Córdoba tenemos estadística de nutrición Sí, ok. Le cuento que en el Banco de Alimentos de Córdoba, Argentina, tenemos estadística de nutrición, ¿sí? Y bueno, es peor que la que usted dio, porque tenemos 1 de cada 2 niños o cada 2 personas beneficiarias mal alimentadas, ¿sí? El 50% de nuestros beneficiarios estaría bien alimentado en base a su talla y su peso. Un 10% está mal alimentado por defecto y un 40% por exceso en obesidad, ¿sí? O sea que es peor que la que usted dio, ¿sí? Y nosotros trabajamos con esos datos, ¿sí? Para mejorar la forma en que proveemos los alimentos, ¿sí? Tratamos de a las organizaciones que están, las rankeamos de una organización que está, digamos, con más deficiencia, a las deficiencia alimentaria, a las que tienen mejor eficiencia alimentaria, y a aquellas que sabemos que son las peores o que hay niños o personas más vulnerables, tratamos de darle alimentos con mayor valor energético, más saludables, ¿sí? Bueno, eso quería compartir. Lo que hacemos nosotros es, más que nada, también capacitarlos, o sea, darle una charla, un taller de capacitación para que conozcan el alimento, que conozcan la verdura, que conozcan los cereales, para que hagan alimentos en sus comedores o en sus merenderos a los niños o a las personas, porque como no conocen el alimento saludable, no lo cocinan, ¿sí? Entonces también yo lo que rescato de su presentación es la publicidad, de ser creativos en publicidades, que lo vamos a incorporar seguramente. Lo que estamos haciendo hoy solamente es capacitar y darles una explicación para que nos demanden esos alimentos, ¿sí? Y por otro lado tenemos un equipo de personas que sale a buscar alimentos saludables, vegetales y verduras, ¿sí? Entonces, entre la capacitación y la entrega logramos reducir esta brecha de mala alimentación.
Thank you for that. I live in the UK, and the one thing that makes the government, apart from Brexit, the one thing that makes the government here very nervous is food banks. Whenever the topic of food banks comes on, the government of the UK gets very nervous, and that's because there's a certain legitimacy and authenticity, and it's news from the non-elite to the elite. That's how I describe it. And the elite doesn't hear it from very often from the non-elite. And the food banks are a way of doing that. So I think that's very powerful. I think it sounds like it's great the way you're using data to guide action and prioritize and sequence action. And I think it's also very important to build the case. And I'm a big fan of using data to name, shame, and fame different organizations. Faming is very important. It's not just naming and shaming. Companies, municipalities, organizations that are doing really great stuff, you have to celebrate them as well as put pressure on those who are not. And ranking is often if that's what you were saying, is a very good way of doing that.
I have a question for you here.
Hi.
Hi. So I don't believe that you'd find any debate in this audience over the need for providing more nutritious options to people who are hungry. There has been some debate over whom is it that gets to choose whether or not they also have options that are not so healthy. Do we decide not to provide sugary beverages, et cetera, as an option? Would you mind speaking to your thinking along those lines of whose prerogative is it? Is it ours? Is it the hungry person's, et cetera?
Yeah. Thank you for that very easy question. To tell you the truth, I don't really have an idea, is my honest answer. I think it is very context-driven. I think it's very easy to say the experts know best, and therefore, if you run a food bank, you shouldn't include anything with sugar over a certain level. But I think that's that's one rule for one group of people and another rule for another group of people. So I think that's problematic. I think whenever possible, be guided by the food-based dietary guidelines of the country that you're in. Every country has a set of food-based dietary guidelines. None of them exclude these kind of foods. They just talk about the frequency with which you consume them. So if you could develop some nutrition education or nutrition material around, maybe it's an opportunity. I don't know. It's probably not very practical. Someone who's desperately hungry doesn't want to come and hear about food. They want to come and eat food and get food. But there may be ways of working with the grain, no pun intended, but working with the grain to embed some nutrition messaging around in the immediate environment. I don't know if it's, I'm waffling a bit, but I think using food-based dietary guidelines that are developed for that context is probably a safe way of doing that.
At the risk of not using a microphone, I apologize. Something that we've done that we believe we've got some. Oh, good. Thank you. Yes.
I'm glad you're answering your own questions. Good.
I'm not going to fully answer it, unfortunately. I wish I had the answer. But what I can say is that the organization that I'm in is Feeding America, and that one of the things that we have done, we refer to as nudging, and I don't know whether that's a scientific term or not, but where we've provided healthy options, and we've used psychology, in fact, to help influence people to choose those options. And we've found some success in doing that. So that's one of the things that I know we're going to continue to try to do more and more of. But I'm actively in debate right now around, and therefore do you also say we refuse to give any donuts out anywhere? That's the question.
I think it's an opportunity to engage with your, I don't know if you call them clientele or customers or beneficiaries. I don't know what all of the above. I think it's an opportunity to engage with your participants, to have discussions about these things and involve them in the decision making. Perhaps I don't know how practical that is, but that's also possible. And I think using the nudges is a subtle way of doing this. Any of you who are staying in this hotel maybe see there's always a box of Pringles on the side, or in American hotels there's always a box of Pringles staring you in the face as you get into the bedroom, and that's all about nudges. So there's no reason you couldn't flip that to make it healthy. It says my time is up. I can keep going forever, but I'm just looking at the organizers. You want me to keep going? Where's Lisa?
Lawrence,
No,
thank you so much.
Lisa's,
Please join me in thanking Dr. Haddad for his time with
thank you,
us.
guys. My pleasure. Thank you.
You can, for sure. All right, and we're ready for our next session. Oh, I don't know.